Good evening, everyone. Friday, March 13th, time for episode 51 of The Last Admiral. And we're going to start off on page 426 of the chapter entitled Captain Harvey Defends the Temeraire. His enemies' bold maneuvers surprised Captain Elias Harvey of the Temeraire. No matter, the Invincible was finished, and soon so too would be their crew. Brown, boyish hair and sideburns cropped his clean-shaven, oval-shaped face, adorned with a regal straight-nosed dark eyes, pursed lips, and a smallish chin. His expressions had a petulant air about them that mirrored his own unproven arrogance. His uniform was stiff and new, as was his command. To arms, he ordered, before brandishing his own rapier and joining in the fray. Initially, his crew maintained the advantage, as their ship was fully 2 decks higher than their opponent's was. His comrade ship, the Neptune, was slow to respond. The Dragonian Marines were gifted swordsmen, and Captain Harvey's own stubborn conceitedness prevented the very fear that he should have felt. Despite his ego, he fought well and commanded competently in this, his first true engagement. The Dragonian captain had seized control of the forecastle. Blond-haired and bearded, he and his crew had partially blackened their faces as camouflage. Armored in black leather, he fought with a broadsword and dagger, but he did not hesitate to kick combatively when the opportunity arose. Archers, Harvey commanded while pointing forward with his rapier. "Bring him down!" Arrows flew, but the savage proved elusive, using his crippled and dying foes as shields, and strategically shifting positions with lightning-fast precision. His fellow Marines proved equally talented, and when one of them died, it seemed the lucky exception. The tide of battle was quickly turning against his crew, when their companion ship, the Neptune, finally came alongside of them and deployed a full complement of knights and marines. They now outnumbered the Dragonian forces more than 4-1. Then the next chapter is Cagney leads his squad into the heart of the Temeraire. Jarrett, James Cagney, never made it to the main deck with Captain Norris. Scaling the hull during the initial assault, he found the lower gun deck's ports open and only a skeleton crew of artillerists left, in place to reload the starboard ballista. Slipping inside with his squad, they drew swords and attacked. The lower gun deck was enormous, spanning over 200 feet in length and nearly 60 feet wide. It supported 24 of the most massive ballista ever built, staggered 12 to port and 12 to starboard. 1/3 of the devices were inclined to strike nearby ships below the waterline. The second third fired level with most ships' lower decks, and the final group was oriented to crash through the top decks or level masts. 12 Flemish sailors were there, and these quickly rushed in to repel them. With only 8 men, Cagney engaged them in a desperate struggle. His blades whirled around his body as he cut his way into their ranks. Limbs, blood, and gore burst from his foes, and his marines fought beside him with the desperation of warriors with nothing at all left to lose. When their skirmish was over, the Furman lay dead along with 2 of his own, but his remaining marines, although previously wounded on land, had avoided further serious injury. Peering out of the gun ports, the gigantic hull of the second maneuvering ship loomed before them only a handful of yards away. Dying fighters fell past them and into the sea between ships. The ocean churned between them, driving great towering waves upward as the 2 warships rocked closer and then parted. The Neptune's own gun ports remained closed, as they had not yet come in range of an enemy ship. Cagney looked at his soldiers with his usual charming, white-toothed grin, Are you thinking what I'm thinking? So obviously, I've taken a lot from the Battle of Trafalgar, but instead of cannons, I exchanged them with medieval ballista, for the most part. And but if you've seen pictures of the Battle of Trafalgar and the aftermath, just ships full of hundreds of dead sailors, the water filled with floating bodies. It was clearly a horrific battle. So I try to capture the same feeling here. Okay. So moving back a little, the Neptune's own gun ports remained closed, as they had not yet come in range of an enemy ship. Cagney looked at his soldiers with his usual charming, white-toothed grin. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Hell yeah, sir, his first sergeant said. They're already loaded and ready to go. Heck, we don't even have to aim. For indeed, the Temeraire's port batteries were never directed at their quarry, and so they were simply left at the ready. Each weapon was a crossbow of unbelievable size, with 16-foot laminate limbs over a foot thick, launching rails of 30 feet, and iron-tipped projectiles over 20 feet in length and 1.5 feet in diameter. Their payloads were loaded, their actions were winched back and locked to their triggers. Spreading out, they released every projectile with deadly effect. At point-blank range, there was no chance of missing, and the ballista delivered the full devastating force stored within them. 4 gigantic barbs tore through the Neptune's hull below the waterline. 4 ripped through their lower gun decks, and the remaining bolts punctured the upper gun deck and exited the main deck above it. Struck without warning, sailors screamed in surprise and others in bitter agony. The Neptune shuddered and listed heavily to starboard. Her leaning masts and sails became hopelessly entangled in the Temeraire's own. Settling downward, the waterline rose 3 feet every minute. The ship's roll drove their captain, Thomas Fremantle, commanding from the poop deck hard into the starboard gunwales. Catching himself to avoid falling into the sea, his eyes were wide with surprise and shock. His coat was blue and bordered in white. His tri-cornered hat was lost overboard. A straight, strong nose and pursed lips dominated his well-formed face. Ah, well, he muttered to his clerk. It looks like there will be no milk for my tea again. We're scuttled, sir, the clerk said. And that is, of course, adapted from historical remarks described in Fighting Sail. Prior to the Battle of Trafalgar, Captain Thomas Fremantle wrote to his wife Betsy, remarking that the only goat on board had died during the storm, obliging him to drink his tea without milk. Okay. All hands, board the Temeraire, Fremantle commanded. I'll see those bastards pay for this. Abandon ship, his first mate ordered. All hands, board the Temeraire. Sailors and marines climbed up from below with great haste. Water was blasting in through a dozen massive holes. Groaning in protest, the ship lurched again as their tangled rigging strained and tore free of the Temeraire. 300 firemen then took to the ropes and climbed the rigging of their companion ship. Swarming pell-mell over the side, they entered the deadly fray. With great suddenness, the Neptune fell beneath the waves, her masts cracking apart and finally tearing free. No less than 50 sailors who had not yet gained the ropes went down with it, and Fremantle was among them. Farewell, George, he said to his clerk, as his trusted servant reached futilely for his retreating hand. Goodbye, my captain, he replied, looking on with tears in his eyes. Fremantle sank beneath the waves without complaint, valiant until the end. Fueled by anger, George climbed the ropes. At least one Dragonian would pay for his captain's death. He would see to it. Captain Norris and his crew were nearly amidships when the second wave of vermin attacked them from the port beam. They were fresh troops hungry for blood. Nearly half of them were well armored, fully trained knights, and the rest were well-seasoned sailors capable with either cutlass, knives, or belaying pins. Now vastly outnumbered, Norris courageously led the fight. The Temeraire's crew had taken the brunt of their initial attack, but the reinforcements heartened them, and they renewed their efforts. If he could capture one of their captains, then they might gain some chance of escape. "Stay with me," he said to his marines who fought next to him. Fencing his way forward, he avoided any long skirmish with combatants in his way, in favor of working his way past them all. Parry, slash, turn and throw, pull away and run, his focus was ever on their captain. Sensing his intent, Captain Harvey's elite guardsmen formed a shield wall across the forecastle. Norris ran right for them, as if he meant to drop his shoulder and force his way through, but then, at the last instant, when the Furman's blades were thrusting forward to cleave him in two, he leaped mightily, clearing the heads of the knights by at least a foot, and careening down upon the startled body of their captain. Rolling free, Captain Harvey came up with his rapier in hand. "Do not interfere," he said to his soldiers. "He is mine." Circling each other, Captain Norris tested his opponent, fainting high and low in an attempt to expose Harvey's style. Harvey met every attempt with his own sword, for in truth his intentions were the same. Their attacks grew bolder and more desperate, as they had to, with neither man finding an opening. Harvey changed his fighting style suddenly and cut Norris across his sword arm, but received a powerful kick to his abdomen in return. Norris's sword fell from his grasp, but he pressed the attack, raising his knee and smashing Harvey's face. His right arm was crippled, but his dagger remained in his left hand. Raising it up for the killing blow, they struck him first. 1,000 stars burst through his eyes and fluttered about. Darkness crept in around his vision, as if someone was closing the bedroom curtains to conceal the moonlight. Spinning away from Harvey, he vaguely saw the gloating face of the sailor who had pitched the belaying pin at him. The knights closed in. Consciousness slipped slowly out of his control. Harvey regained his feet. His nose was broken and bloody, but he was smiling in anticipation of his prize. Captain Norris knew that to stand and fight now was to die helplessly unawares in utter futility. Perhaps an honorable death for him, but it was the satisfaction of his foe that bothered him the most. Better to die in the deep like a marine than to allow the display of his broken body in a crow's cage for all to see. With the last of his strength, he stumbled to the gunwale and fell awkwardly over the side. Hitting the projecting curve of the hull, it propelled him away from the ship as Firmish knights lunged forward to catch him and drag him back. Too slow to seize him, he fell 3 stories and struck a projecting yardarm from his own sinking ship. Trying to clutch it, the pain in his arm was the measure of anguish that finally broke his invincible will. Struggling to stay afloat, parts of the rigging and a twisted sail tangled around his legs. Ducking under, he tried to free himself as the ocean sucked him down along with his ship. He reached for his boot knife in order to cut his legs free, but it had somehow fallen out. Invincible would not release her grasp. With a survivor's heart, he searched for salvation in any form, but found none. A multitude of sharks ripped and tore at broken bodies all around him, but failed to pursue him in favor of easier fare. Down into the merciless deep he fell, trapped by the fastenings of his own proud ship, and a few flashes of fire's light above him were the last things that he saw. So the belaying pin is reminiscent of Code of Silence. People my age or older might recall that fantastic Chuck Norris film. Okay. Best bar fight ever. Code of Silence. Okay. But did Chuck Norris just die in the deep? Of course, if anybody's read my books, you realize that most characters that I love seemingly somehow survive in the end and come back in some form. So we'll see if we see Charles Norris again. Okay. Bastard, Captain Harvey swore at the interfering sailor. Get out of my sight. Wiping his bloody nose on his sleeve, it brought pain but hardened his resolve. His knights fought a small band of vengeful marines on the quarterdeck beneath him. Fighting savagely, his death was their clear intention. With rapier in hand and a twisted nose, he descended the stairs and joined in the struggle. The brutality of that fight, a duel against warriors devoid of hope and with their backs to the gunwale, proved to all who witnessed it the merit of their untested Captain Harvey, who then delivered the fight, received it in like kind, and won. The battle wore on, shifting back and forth along the full length of the ship. The Dragonian fighters refused surrender, and as their strength dwindled, they seemed to fight ever harder. We've had it, sir, reported Gordon, a stocky human marine with a face half scarred by fire. Captain Cagney had posted him as a sentry by the stairwell leading out of the cargo hold. They're getting cut to pieces. How many of us are left up there? It's quieting down, sir, Gordon observed. Every uniform that I see bears the Red Castle's emblem. There is at least 300 men, topside. Cagney stood behind him inside of the gun deck with 4 Dark Elfar Marines with him. The way that I see it, Cagney said to them, we still have a few choices. We could rush up there and kill as many of them as we can before we die. We might slip out of the gun ports and take our chances in the sea, or we can go below and sabotage the ship, in which case they will almost surely kill us. Whatever we do, Gordon replied, we'd better do it fast. I say we go below and set fire to the whole thing, Uriel declared, and then slip out through the gun ports before they kill us. Cagney liked the sound of it. Well, Marines, he charged, Christie, Maeve and Virgil, what say you? Christie spoke for them all. Let's burn this scow. Slipping down one set of stairs and then another, they reached the supply room and cargo hold. A trio of oil lamps provided light within the hallway leading to it. Food stores, casks of brandy, and over 50 barrels of precious whale oil were stored there. The barrels were too heavy to move easily, and the Furman would discover them any second. What do you think, sir? Smash the knobs off of them and cave in as many as you can. It was slippery, messy work, but soon the floor was 6 inches deep and fluid. Now get moving, Cagney commanded. Stick together and head for the lower gun ports. Lifting a lantern from the hook that supported it, he removed its glass shroud, bent down, and ignited the oil slick. Flames began to wick out across its surface and rise up along the walls. Moving out, he tossed the 2 remaining lamps into the adjoining rooms, hoping to start fresh blazes there. It was hardly necessary, for the sealed barrels of oil burst explosively, driving the fire outward into the bilge and through the orlop deck. Dark smoke filled the air. The huffing sound of explosions continued, and these emanated through the ladderway and the main hatchway into the cargo hold. The alarm sounded. Crew members and knights were soon rushing below to investigate, but by the time they reached the lower decks, it was too late. The saboteurs were long gone. The fire raged, and asphyxiating smoke made fighting it impossible. The flames spread rapidly and leaped out from the gun ports. And the scow was an unpowered, flat-bottomed boat for carrying freight, refuge, and a terrible insult when describing a ship of the line. An orlop is the lowest deck of a ship with 3 or more decks. It's too late, the Knight's captain reported. All of the lower compartments are aflame. Captain Harvey could not then fathom the reverse of their victory. To be broken in this, his first true engagement, was such a loss of honor that only by going down with his ship could he retain it. Lower the ship's boats, he commanded. Abandon ship. Signal officer. Raise the distress flag. That's where we'll stop today's episode. Next episode is Vice Admiral Collingwood observes the fight from the poop deck on page 435. That's where we'll start off episode 52. Have a great night.